It was one of those brutal winter days up in northern Michigan, the kind where the wind cuts right through your jacket and the snow piles up so high you can barely see the road. Over at Pinewood Nature Reserve, things were usually pretty quiet this time of year. The place was huge, thousands of acres of thick forest, rocky hills, and frozen streams, all surrounded by a tall chain-link fence. It was home to deer, bears, and a pack of gray wolves that the researchers there kept tabs on. Most folks in town knew about the wolves. People like Mike Tanner, the head ranger, would talk about them at the diner sometimes, saying how they were smart, tough animals that stuck together no matter what. But that morning, Mike showed up at the reserve and knew something was off. He'd been out checking the trails with his thermos of coffee, his breath puffing out in little clouds, when he spotted it, a big, jagged hole in the fence along the western edge. The metal was bent outward, like something had rammed it hard from the inside. He crouched down, ran his gloved hand along the edges, and muttered, "Well, crap." The snow around it was a mess, paw prints scattered everywhere, deep and wide, heading off into the woods beyond the boundary. He radioed back to the office right away. "Jenny, you there?" he said, his voice crackling over the static. "We've got a problem. Fence is busted, and I think some of the wolves are gone." Jenny Carter, the assistant ranger, was at her desk warming her hands on a mug of tea. She nearly spilled it when she heard him. "Gone? Like, gone? How many?" "No idea yet," Mike said. "But the tracks don't lie. They're out there somewhere." By noon, the whole team was buzzing. They pulled up the logs from the wolves' tracking collars. 6 of them had signals that were fading fast, moving west, way past where they should have been. The pack had 12 wolves total, and now half of them were missing. There was Max, the big alpha with the scarred ear, Luna, his mate who always kept the pups in line, and a handful of younger ones like Rusty and Bella. These weren't just any animals, they were family to the crew at Pinewood. Mike and Jenny had watched them grow up, tracked their hunts, even laughed about how Max would howl at the moon like he was showing off. Theories started flying around the office. "Maybe a bear spooked Em," said Tom, the maintenance guy, scratching his beard. "Or some idiot hunter cut the fence to mess with us." Jenny shook her head. "Nah, those prints are wolf, not bear. And hunters don't come this far in winter, they'd freeze their butts off." Mike stayed quiet, staring out the window at the snow-covered trees. He had a gut feeling this wasn't random. Wolves didn't just bust out and vanish. They were too smart for that. By late afternoon, they'd patched up the hole with some spare fencing, but the mood was grim. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange and pink, and the temperature was dropping fast. Jenny pulled on her coat and grabbed a flashlight. "I'm gonna follow those tracks a bit, see where they lead," she said. Mike nodded. "Take the snowmobile, and don't go too far. Radio me if you see anything." She headed out, the hum of the engine cutting through the silence. The tracks were clear at first, big, bold prints pressed deep into the snow. They zigzagged through the pines, over a frozen creek, and then just kept going, stretching farther than she'd expected. About a mile out, she stopped and killed the engine, listening. The wind whistled through the branches, but there was no howling, no rustling, nothing. Just those tracks, disappearing into the dark woods like a trail of breadcrumbs. Back at the reserve, Mike poured himself another coffee and stared at the map on the wall. "Where the hell are you guys going?" he muttered. He didn't know it yet, but those wolves, Max, Luna, and the rest, were already miles away, moving with purpose, like they had a plan. And whatever it was just getting started. A couple days after the breakout, word started spreading beyond Pinewood Reserve. Up in the little town of Elk Hollow, about 30 miles west, folks were already whispering about something weird in the woods. Hunters, mostly, guys like Jake Miller and his buddy Chris, who'd been out tracking deer since the snow let up. They were the kind who'd brag about anything over beers at the bar, but this time, they weren't joking around. Jake showed up at the gas station that Tuesday morning, his truck still caked with snow, and leaned over the counter where Sarah, the cashier, was ringing up his coffee. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, his voice low like he was spilling a secret. "Me and Chris found tracks out there, big ones. Ain't no deer, ain't no bear. Looked like wolves, Sarah. A whole pack." Sarah raised an eyebrow, handing him his change. "Wolves? Out here? Come on, Jake, you sure it wasn't just some dogs?" "Nah, these were different," he said, shaking his head. "Paws the size of my hand, spread out like they were hauling ass. Went on for miles." He pulled out his phone and showed her a blurry picture, deep prints in the snow, lined up in a tight pattern, cutting through the forest like an arrow. By lunchtime, Jake and Chris were back out there with their rifles, following the trail. The woods west of Elk Hollow were thick, towering pines and tangled underbrush, the kind of place where you could get lost if you didn't know your way. The tracks started near an old logging road, then veered sharp into the trees. Jake took the lead, his boots crunching through the crusty snow, while Chris lagged behind, muttering about how they should have stayed home with a six-pack instead. "Man, these things are moving fast," Jake said, crouching to check a print. "Look how deep they are, like they're running, but not scared. More like they've got somewhere to be." Chris squinted ahead, the late afternoon sun barely filtering through the branches. "What's a pack of wolves even doing out here? Ain't no reserve nearby. Maybe they're lost or something." Jake snorted. "Lost? Nah, dude, they're too straight. This ain't wandering. They're headed somewhere." He stood up, brushing snow off his jeans, and pointed west. "Let's keep going. I want to see where this ends." They followed the tracks for hours, weaving through the forest as the sky turned gray and the wind picked up. The trail stretched on, 10 miles, then 20, then more. By dusk, they were deep in the backcountry, farther than they'd planned. The prints stayed steady, cutting across frozen streams and up rocky hills like the wolves didn't care about the terrain. Jake kept snapping pictures, half excited, half creeped out. Chris, though, was getting antsy. "Dude, it's gonna be dark soon," he said, glancing at his watch. "We're, like, 40 miles from the truck. What if these things circle back and jump us?" Jake laughed, but it was a little forced. "They're long gone, man. Look at the snow, no new prints. They're not hunting us. They're just moving." Back at Pinewood, Jenny was piecing things together too. She called up a buddy at the state wildlife office, a guy named Dave, and asked him to pull satellite data. Sure enough, the wolves' collar signals were pinging way out west, moving fast, like Jake said. 40 miles in 2 days? Dave whistled over the phone. "That's nuts. They're not stopping to eat or rest. What's driving them?" "No clue," Jenny said, staring at the blinking dots on her laptop. "But they're not acting lost. It's like they know exactly where they're headed." Mike walked in, his face still red from the cold, and tossed his hat on the desk. "Any updates?" "Yeah," Jenny said, spinning the screen toward him. "They're halfway to Elk Hollow. Hunters out there found tracks too. Same pack, I bet." Mike frowned, rubbing his jaw. "Elk Hollow? That's a haul. What's out there for 'em? No prey worth chasing that far." Jenny shrugged. "Maybe it's not about prey. Maybe they're looking for something else." That night, Jake and Chris finally gave up and hiked back to their truck, exhausted but buzzing. They didn't know it, but those wolves, Max, Luna, and the crew, were still out there, pushing through the dark. The snow kept falling, covering their tracks little by little, but they didn't slow down. Whatever was pulling them west, it wasn't letting up. And back at the reserve, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to keep up with the latest exciting stories. I am very pleased when you like the video and write comments. Thank you! About a week after the wolves bolted from Pinewood, things got weird over in Elk Hollow. Out on the edge of town, where the houses thin out and the woods take over, lived a farmer named Ben Harper. He was one of those quiet types, kept to himself, raised chickens and a few cows, and didn't bother anyone. His place was a little rundown, with a sagging porch and a barn that creaked in the wind, but it was home. That Wednesday night, Ben was finishing up some chores, the cold biting at his knuckles as he hauled a bucket of feed across the yard. The snow was deep, glowing faintly under the moonlight, and everything was dead quiet until it wasn't. He heard it first, a soft crunch, like boots on fresh snow. Except he was alone out there, or so he thought. He stopped, set the bucket down, and listened. Nothing. Just the wind rattling the bare trees. Probably a deer, he muttered, shaking it off. But then he saw them, eyes glinting in the dark, right at the tree line past his fence. Not one pair, but 6, maybe more, all fixed on him. His stomach did a little flip. Ben grabbed the flashlight off his belt and flicked it on, sweeping the beam across the yard. There they were, wolves. Big ones. Gray coats blending with the shadows, standing still as statues, just watching him. Max was up front. Ben didn't know his name, of course, but that scarred ear and those steady yellow eyes made him look like the boss. Luna was next to him, her head tilted slightly, and the others fanned out behind, silent and calm. No growling, no teeth, nothing aggressive. Just staring. Whoa, Ben said under his breath, taking a step back. His heart was thumping, but he didn't run. He'd seen coyotes before, even a bear once, but this was different. These wolves weren't scared of him, and they weren't hunting. His cows were right there in the barn, chickens clucking in the coop, but the pack didn't even glance that way. They just stood there, like they were sizing him up, or maybe the house, or the whole damn world beyond the trees. For a solid minute, nobody moved. Ben's flashlight beam shook a little, cutting through the dark, but the wolves didn't flinch. Then, slow as anything, Max turned his head, looked at Luna, and started walking. Not toward Ben, but away, back into the woods. The others followed, one by one. They just melted into the shadows, their paws barely making a sound. Ben stood there, frozen, until the last tail flicked out of sight. What the hell was that? He said to nobody, his breath puffing out in the cold. Next morning, he called his sister, Emily, who lived in town. She picked up on the second ring, still half asleep. Ben, it's like 7. What's up? Wolves, he said, pacing his kitchen with a mug of coffee. A whole pack, right by the house last night. Didn't do anything, just stared at me and left. Emily laughed, thinking he was messing with her. Wolves? Come on, Ben, you been drinking Dad's old moonshine again? I'm serious, he snapped. Biggest damn dogs I've ever seen. They were right there, calm as you please, then poof, gone. She stopped laughing. Okay, that's freaky. You sure they weren't lost or something? Didn't look lost, he said. Looked like they knew exactly what they were doing. Word got around Elk Hollow fast. By noon, half the town was talking about Ben's wolves. Jake and Chris, the hunters, overheard it at the diner and perked up. Told you, Jake said, elbowing Chris. Those tracks were headed this way. Bet it's the same pack. Chris just nodded, poking at his eggs. Yeah, but why didn't they eat his cows? That's weird, man. Back at Pinewood, Jenny got a call from the sheriff's office in Elk Hollow. Some deputy named Ryan, who sounded more curious than worried. Hey, got a farmer out here saying he saw wolves last night, Ryan said. You guys lose any? Jenny's eyes lit up. Yeah, 6 of them took off a week ago. Collars show they're near you. That farmer, Ben, right? He okay? He's fine, Ryan said. Said they didn't attack, just watched him. Kinda spooky, but no harm done. Jenny hung up and ran to tell Mike. They're in Elk Hollow. Ben Harper saw 'em, didn't hurt a thing, just stood there. Mike leaned back in his chair, chewing on a toothpick. Watching him? That's not normal. Wolves don't just hang out. Maybe they're curious, Jenny said. Checking out what's out there. Mike grunted. Maybe. But they've been gone a week. What's next? Out in the woods, Max and the pack were already moving again, leaving Ben's farm behind. The snow stretched out endless in front of them, but their steps were sure. Whatever they were after, they weren't done yet. A week after Ben Harper's wolf encounter, snow kept falling around Elk Hollow, burying the woods in white. At Pinewood Nature Reserve, the team was starting to think their pack, Max, Luna, and the rest, might be gone for good. The collar signals flickered, weak and unreliable, like the wolves were teasing them. But late Wednesday, the security cameras along the fence lit up. Motion in the western sector, right where the breakout happened. Jenny was in the office, wrapped in a blanket, when her laptop pinged. She jolted, spilling tea, and pulled up the feed. There they were, gray shapes moving together, eyes glowing in the infrared light. Max led the way, his scarred ear clear, with Luna beside him, steady and calm. The others, Rusty, Bella, and the young ones, followed. They weren't rushing, just walking, like they'd been out for a stroll and decided to head home. Mike shuffled in, thermos in hand, leaving wet boot prints. He peeked at the screen and grunted. Well, I'll be damned. They're back. Jenny nodded, eyes glued to the video. The cameras caught the pack skirting the repaired fence, pausing briefly, then moving along it, as if checking the fix. Snow crunched under their paws, and soon they slipped out of sight, heading deeper into the reserve. The collar signals steadied, strong and clear. They were home. Next morning, the team went out to check. Tracks stretched from the fence through the pines, past a frozen stream, and into the heart of the woods. The wolves had settled near their old den, a rocky overhang dusted with snow. Max's prints were deepest, like he'd been pacing, while Luna stayed close to the others, keeping them in line. No signs of a fight or a hunt, just a quiet return. Jenny crouched by the den, brushing snow off a rock. She pictured them out there, trekking 40 miles through the cold, passing Ben's farm, then turning back. Mike stood nearby, hands in his pockets, staring at the tracks. The wind whistled through the trees, but the forest felt alive again, like it had been holding its breath. The wolves were back where they started, curled up in the den as if nothing had happened. Whatever pulled them out there, they'd found their way home. The wolves were back at Pinewood Nature Reserve, and the snow kept falling, softening the edges of their tracks. By Friday, the team had settled into a strange kind of relief. Max, Luna, and the pack were curled up in their den, a rocky nook tucked under a ridge, like they'd never left. The busted fence, the 40-mile trek, Ben Harper's weird encounter, it all felt like a dream now, fading under the weight of the winter quiet. But the folks at the reserve couldn't stop wondering, why'd they go? Jenny spent that morning crunching data, her laptop glowing in the dim office. The collar signals showed the wolves' path, west to Elk Hollow, a loop near Ben's farm, then straight back. No detours, no hunting stops. She traced the route on a map, her finger sliding over the paper, and frowned. It wasn't random. They'd moved fast, purposeful, like they had a mission. But what? There was no big prey out there, no rival packs, nothing worth the trip. Just snow, trees, and a farmer's puzzled stare. Mike was out by the den, bundled in his coat, watching steam rise from his thermos. He studied the paw prints, Max's deep and wide, Luna's lighter, the others scattered around. The pack looked content now, sprawled out in the snow, their gray fur blending with the rocks. He kicked at a drift, thinking about how they'd busted out, ran hard, then came right back. It didn't add up like a normal wolf thing, hunger or fear or territory. This was different. By afternoon, the team huddled in the office, tossing ideas around. Jenny leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen on the desk. She figured maybe the wolves just got curious. The reserve was all they'd known, fenced in, safe, predictable. Maybe that broken fence was like a door swinging open, tempting them to see what was out there. Max, with his scarred ear and bold stride, might have led the charge, Luna keeping the pack tight behind him. They'd seen the world, woods, farms, snow, and decided it wasn't for them. Mike nodded, sipping his coffee. He liked that theory. Wolves were smart, after all. Smarter than people gave them credit for. He pictured Max standing at Ben's fence, yellow eyes locked on the house, not hungry, just taking it in. Maybe they'd wanted a taste of freedom, a quick adventure beyond the pines. But home, the den, the forest, the familiar howl of the wind, pulled them back. It was where they belonged. The next day, they checked the cameras again. The pack was still there, lounging in the snow. Rusty chased his tail for a bit, kicking up powder, while Bella nipped at him, playful and relaxed. Max stretched out on a rock, his head high, scanning the trees. Luna lay nearby, her eyes half closed, calm as ever. The reserve felt whole again, the tension gone. Jenny scribbled a note in the log, pack returned. No harm done. Theory, they just wanted to explore. She shut the laptop and headed outside, the cold biting her cheeks. Mike was already there, staring at the horizon. The snow stretched endless, but the wolves weren't going anywhere now. They'd seen the outside, tested it, and picked home. And that was that. The fence got reinforced, the tracks got buried, and life at Pinewood rolled on. Somewhere in the den, Max let out a low howl, long and steady, echoing through the trees. The pack was back, and the wild stayed wild, just the way it should be.